What's going on, everyone? My name is Hunter, and welcome to the fourth episode of the SvelteKit and PocketBase series. In this video, we're going to be adding the ability to create, read, update, and delete projects from our application. If you find this content useful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so before we actually get started into building the page and the routes and everything for our projects or creating our projects, let's go ahead and define the collection inside of our PocketBase server. So I'm going to come into PocketBase and I'm going to create a new collection, and I'm going to call this projects. I'm going to add a new field, and the first field is going to be the name. So it's going to be the name of the project. So we're going to give it a name. It's going to have a minimum length of 2, and we'll just say a maximum length of 64 for now. But this value is arbitrary. It can be whatever you'd like it to be. It will be required, and it doesn't need to be unique. We'll add another field. This one is going to be the tagline. So it's going to be basically a short little blurb about the project, right? And for this one, we'll also put a minimum length of 2 and then a maximum length of 64 here as well. Again, this should be a pretty short line, a quick summary of what the project's going to be. This is also going to be required. Again, feel free to make these non-required if you see fit, but with the structure of our application and in the design that I have planned out for us, we're going to want these values to be present. So we'll add another field. This one is going to be text as well, and this is going to be a description. So it's going to be a bit of a longer description of the application. So what does this application do? Who is it for? And so on and so forth. So again, this one, we could potentially leave this blank. I think this is fine to leave blank, but we'll just set a minimum length of 2 here and then a maximum length of, let's just say 512. And we'll leave this non-empty for now. Then we're going to add another field. This is going to be URL. So this is going to be named URL. It's going to be the URL to the project. And what's really cool about PocketBase is we can actually set up specific domains. So for example, if you wanted to add user social links to the user profiles, you could add, a Twitter field and then only allow domains that are from twitter.com, right? So twitter.com/huntabyte would be okay. But if I put something else, it wouldn't be allowed. So the database would reject it, which is pretty cool. We'll make this not empty as well. We want them to provide a URL to the project, whether that's a GitHub link or a link to the project directly. We want something here. And then for this next one, we'll do a file, and this is going to be a thumbnail. So it's going to be a thumbnail of the image or of the project. You can think of this like a YouTube thumbnail, right? So it's going to show up on the homepage, on the different pages where we would see the project, right? The max file size defaults to 5 meg. So we'll just leave that alone. For the MIME types, we do want to set the images, but by default, they don't actually include WebP here. So we'll say image/WebP here as well. And then for thumb sizes, this is pretty cool. So what this will allow us to do is it actually generates thumbs lazily on the first access based on the values that we input here. So you can add as many different thumb sizes as you'd like. We're going to do one right now for 80 by 80. So we can say 80 by 80. And then this, we're going to leave, this can be empty. Okay. So we're going to have a default that we're going to be able to put here if this is empty. So we can leave this button here unchecked. And then what we're going to need to add is one last field, and that's going to be the relation field, and it's going to be the user. So who owns this project? And then I'm going to select the users collection. There can only be one. And then it says delete record on relation delete. We want this to be true. What this means is that if this relation is deleted, so if this user is deleted that's related to this project, we also want this project to be deleted, right? We don't want a project floating around without an owner, okay? This has to be non-empty as well. And then now what we need to do is we actually need to set up some API rules. So PocketBase has the filter syntax and operators that we can check out here. Let me zoom in a bit on the site. And they have quite a bit of different options. So we can see here that we can do @request.auth.role, @request.auth.id. So I'm going to show you a few of these and you'll get a good idea as to what you can use moving forward. So if we come in here, so for projects, we want projects to be publicly available to list and view on our website or on our application. So we're going to uncheck both of these. So we'll leave these open to the public. However, for create, we first want the @request.auth.id. And this is going to be the ID of the user that's making the request to create this project, right? So the auth ID, we want this to not be equal to nothing, right? So they have to have that. And we want the request.auth.id to be equal to the request.data.user. And the request.data, so this is going to be the data that we're passing to PocketBase to create this project, right? And if you recall, we created that user field over here, user, right? So what we want the request.auth.id to be equal to the request.data.user. So we don't want somebody creating a project for somebody else. And we want to make sure that whoever's creating this project is the person that they have listed in the body or in the form data or whatever, right? So we could set this here. And then for the update action, we actually want the @request.auth.id to be equal to the user. And when we just do user here without the @ request, it's going to be what is the user of the field or of the row that we're trying to update, right? So if we're updating something, we're obviously going to have an ID that we're going to pass through. It's going to find that row. It's going to look at the user. So who is the user of this project? What is related to this? And then the request.auth.id has to match that user. Okay. So nobody else can update anybody else's projects. The same thing will go for the delete action as well. Okay. So now we have some basic API rules set up. We can go ahead and click create here. And now we have our projects collection. We have our rules. Of course, you can always look here to see any of the information that you would need to see as far as how to interact with your project, but I have most of these memorized. We will refer back to this here in a bit for something else though. So let's go ahead and dive into VS Code and get started with actually creating the pages that we need to create our projects. Okay, so inside of VS Code, we're gonna need to create a few new routes here to make this possible. We're gonna start off with inside of routes, we're gonna create a new directory. We're gonna call this projects. And then we're gonna have another directory inside of that called new. And then we'll have a plus page.svelte and a plus page.server.js. The plus page.svelte is going to contain our form, and the plus page.server.js is going to contain our actions. So let's go ahead and get this set up. So I know I'm going to need inputs, right? Because we're going to create a form. So I'm going to add some script tags here, and I'm going to import input from lib/components. And then I'm going to set up the initial structure of the page. And then I'm going to have a form tag here. The action is going to eventually be !/create. It's going to have a class of flex call, space y2 with full and item center. And then the ink type here is going to be multipart /form data. So similar to how we did the avatar earlier, we need to make sure that it is multipart form data because we are going to be uploading that thumbnail, right? And then the method is of course going to be post. And then we can start to add some of our form fields here. So we'll add a title first, and this title is going to just pretty much say what this form does. And then we'll have a little bit of a description underneath of that. And then we'll add the inputs. Okay, so the first input is going to be for the project's name, right? So add an input, we'll give it an ID of name. We'll have a label equal to project name. And then we'll have another input with the ID of tagline and the label of project tagline. And then a few more, we'll have one for URL. And then we're actually going to have a text area here for our description, right? Because it's going to be more than just one line. It's 512 total characters, but we have the limit set to right now. So we need to use a text area. So let me just go ahead and set up the structure for that real quick. The text area's name is going to be description. It's going to have a class of text area bordered, a height of 24, and resize none so that they can't resize it. Again, you can mess with this if you wanted to, and then we'll put that like that. And then we will have another form control, and this one is going to be for the actual file input for the thumbnail. So we'll set that up as well. And this input is going to be of type file. It's going to have a name of thumbnail. And the ID is going to be thumbnail. And the value is going to be, or actually the class is going to be file input, file-input, and file-input bordered. We'll do a width of full and a max width of large. And then last but not least, we're going to have a button. Okay, so we have our inputs here. We have our button, we have our form. So now let's check out what this looks like. So if we go to our application here and we go to /projects/new, we can see that we have this nice form here. It's not very beautiful just yet. And I think the text area bordered didn't seem to work. So let me actually just save my styles here really quick. Okay, there we go. When I saved the Svelte config and the post CSS, it seemed to reload the styles. And now we have the nice form here set up for us. So we have this is a newer component that Days UI added for files, which is pretty cool. So we can actually get started on adding the actual actions themselves now. So if we go into the page.server of this new, we're going to first set up a load function. So export const load, and this is going to take in locals, and we're just going to check to see if the user is authenticated or not. So if no locals.pb.authstore.is valid, then we want to throw a redirect to the login page, and then we'll have the action. So export const actions, We'll have a create action. It's going to be asynchronous. It's going to take in a request and locals. And then we're going to get the form data. So we'll say const form data equals await request.form data. And it's going to seem familiar because we've done this for other things, for the user profiles and things like that. And then just like for the avatar, what we want to do is we want to get the thumbnail out of form data and then check the size of it to see if it exists, like see if it's been changed, right? Because if somebody doesn't add a thumbnail, we don't want to post it to the PocketBase server because it will reject it because it's going to be that application octet stream, right? So we want to say const thumbnail equals form data.get thumbnail. We'll check the thumbnail.size to see if it's equal to 0. And then if it is, we will say form data.delete thumbnail. And then one thing that we actually need to add to our form data, because it wasn't included in a hidden input or anything like that, we can just add it here, is the user, right? Because if you recall, we need that user ID be added here to our project in order to actually relate the project to a user. So what we can say is form data.append will append user. So for the user field, we want to say locals.user.id. And then we'll set up a try catch block, which where we'll actually post the information to the PocketBase server. And we'll say await locals.pb.collection projects collection.create. And then we'll just pass form data. We'll catch the error. We'll console log it just so we can see it in our console if there is an error. And then we'll just return, or we'll throw an error, a SvelteKit error with error.status and error.message. So what this is going to actually return, or what this is actually going to throw if there is an error with this, is a client response error from PocketBase, and that extends the actual just error object. So it's going to have a status and a message always. So this is safe to put here. And then if everything goes well, we'll throw a redirect to the homepage for now, but eventually we'll redirect this to somewhere else. Okay, so it looks like we have everything set up here and ready to go. So let's go ahead and test this out. So let's create a project. I'm going to create Dracula UI. And then I'm just going to choose one of these that I have from previous uses. So I have this thumbnail image. So when I click create project here, we can see that we got redirected to the homepage, right? And then if we go into our PocketBase server and we refresh, we're going to see that we now have a new project created. It has everything. It does not have the thumbnail though. And that is because I misspelled thumbnail. So let's fix that really quick here and then resubmit that. I apologize for that. So we'll just change this name to thumbnail and then click save. And then what I'll do is I'll just delete this record out of here for now, and then I'll re-add that. So let's go into our application and we can click this add project button because we linked that earlier, and we'll just re-add this really quick. So now when we refresh, we are going to in fact have the thumbnail here. We have the user. If we look at the user, Iris Johnston, that's who I'm currently logged in as. They are related to the project, and our project has been created. Great. So now let's set up the actual read of the project on our application. So we'll have a page dedicated to the project, and then we'll move on to being able to edit the projects and delete the projects as well. So let's first come into our application, or into our VS Code here, and we'll just close out of these for now. And then inside of the projects directory, we're going to create another directory called project ID. And this is going to be using route params, right? So if you're not familiar with how route params work, I do have a video on that. I'll leave a card in the top right. Definitely go check that out because it'll make a lot more sense. And then we'll have a plus page.svelte here, as well as a plus page.server here as well. Okay, so for the plus page.server, we're going to set up a load function, and we're going to actually get the project based on the route param that is passed in the project ID. So we'll say export const load. It's going to take in locals and params. We'll set up a function. We'll say const get project. It's going to be asynchronous, and it's going to take in a project ID. We'll set up a try catch block here. And we'll say const project equals serialized non-POJOs. So we need to import that in from our utils. We'll say await locals.pb.collection. We want the projects collection, and we want to get one, and we're going to pass in the project ID, right? And that project ID is going to be passed into here through an argument of our function. And then we want to return the project. And then if we catch an error, we're going to console log the error. And then we'll throw error again here, error.status and error.message. And then underneath this function here, we're going to say return project is get project, and we'll pass in params.project ID. So now we're going to have access to project inside of data within our page.svelte, right? So what we can do is we can set up a script tag and say export let data. And then we'll set up some initial structure for our page. So we'll just set this up really quick. So I'm setting up the avatar, and this avatar is actually going to have the thumbnail, right? So we'll set up an image tag. The source is going to be data.project.thumbnail. So if this is true, right? If this is not undefined, then we want to say get image URL, which we actually need to import as well from our utils. And we'll pass in the data.project.collection ID, data.project.id, which is the record ID, and then the data.project.thumbnail, which is the file name. And then we'll also pass in 80 by 80 because that's going to be our thumb size. And if you recall, we set that in our thumbnails, right? So we'll say 80 by 80. And then if data.project.thumbnail does not exist, so if it is undefined, we're going to set up a little placeholder image for this. So we'll say via.placeholder.com/150. I guess we can do /80 here. That's going to be the height and width. And then we'll set up some colors here. So I'm going to set up one of the colors for Daisy UI with the theme that we're currently using. FFFFF is going to be white, and that's going to be our foreground color. And then we'll say text equals data.project.name. And you'll see what this will look like here in a second when we add a project that doesn't have a thumbnail. But this is just going to be basically a purple image that has the project name as text on the actual image. So we can say alt is going to be the project thumbnail, and then we'll set up an H1, and it's going to have the project name. So data.project.name here, and then we'll have a paragraph tag. It's going to have a class of text to Excel, font light, MT2, and it's going to be the tagline. And then we could also set up something for the description too. So we could say another p tag here. We can leave everything as default, and we'll just say data.project.description. So now when we go to one of our projects here, so let's grab the ID of this project here. And then if I go to the application, I go to /projects, and then /that ID, we now get the project loaded here on this page. Now, again, I'm not going to do too much with this page in particular because, again, I'm going to leave it up to you to go through and build out however you'd like. Now we have access to the project on its own page using route params, and we can do some things with that in a little bit. Okay, so now let's set up the edit page for our project to be able to actually edit projects, right? And what we'll do there is we're actually going to go into our project ID directory here. And what we want to do is we want to set up a new directory called edit. And it's going to have a +page.svelte and a +page.server.js as usual. Now for the +page.server.js file, what we're going to do is, let me close out of some of these other ones here. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to set up a load function, of course. So we'll say export const load equals, it's going to take in locals and params. And then typically what I do is I actually return promises in my load functions. However, in this case, we're not going to be able to do that because not only do we want to check to make sure the user is authenticated, we also want to make sure that the user actually owns this project that they're attempting to edit or to navigate to the edit page for, right? So first we'll run a normal check. So if locals.pb.authstore.is valid, if it's not true, right, then we want to throw an error. And this error is going to say 401 unauthorized. And then we'll say try, and we'll say const project equals serialized non-POJOs, which we need to import. We'll say await locals.pb.collection. We're going to get the projects collection, and then we're going to get one, and it's going to be the params.project ID, and then we'll return project. Well, actually, we need to check real quick here. So now we want to check if locals.user.id is equal to project.id. We'll say if not, I guess we can say if, that's fine. So if locals.user.id is equal to project ID, we want to return the project. Else we want to throw an error, and we'll say 403 unauthorized or forbidden, right? And then we'll catch here, and then we'll console log the error, and then we'll throw the error. And we actually need to make this load function asynchronous here. Let's make sure we do that. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're first checking to see, okay, is this even a logged in user? If it's not, throw an error saying they're unauthorized. And then we're going to try to get the project first, right? And then if the locals.user.id is equal to the project ID, I should say project.user, sorry. So project.user, we want to return the project. If not, we're going to throw an error. It says 403 forbidden. So we know your identity. You're just not authorized to access this resource. And then we're going to catch that error here. So we're going to catch either the error here or the error here, depending on whatever one comes first, right? And then we'll console log it, and then we'll throw that error back to the client. Okay, cool. So now let's actually set up the page.svelte for this. So it's going to have our edit form. Okay, so we're obviously going to take in data. So we'll say export let data, and we'll set up the structure. It's actually going to be a form. I don't know why I did a flex there. The form is going to have a method of post, and an action is going to be eventually update project. And then it's again going to be multi-part form data, because we're going to have those thumbnails that we're going to have to deal with, right? We'll have an H3, which is going to describe what this form is for. Edit data.project.name. We can do that here. And then what we'll set up is a couple inputs. So I have an input with an ID of name, a value equal to data.project.name, or an empty string for now. And then we'll have another input. It's going to be for the tagline. And then we'll have another one for the URL. So we can just adjust this to URL here, or tagline, and then adjust this one to URL. And we actually need to import input. So let's do that. And then we need to set up our text area again. So we can set that up real quick. Okay, and actually I forgot to add labels to these inputs. So let's add these here. So we'll say label equals name. We'll have the same thing here for a tagline. And then we'll have another one here. Okay, and then we need to start working on our thumbnail now. So for our thumbnail, we'll have another form control div. And then we actually want to check here to see if the thumbnail exists. So we'll say if data.project.thumbnail, right? Because it could not exist, right? Then we want to say, set up a label. It's before thumbnail. Class is going to be avatar with a width of 20. Hover, we're going to do cursor pointer. And then we're going to have another label inside of this one. It's also going to be for thumbnail. It's going to have a class of absolute with a top -1.5 and a right -1.5. And this is going to how we'll be able to actually delete the thumbnail if we'd like to. So I'll show you that here in just a second. And then we'll have a button here. Class is going to be button, button error, button small, and button circle. And then we're going to need to import icon and a trash icon from hero icon. So we can say import icon, whoops, and trash from Svelte hero icons. So then inside this button, we'll say icon. Source is going to be trash. Class will be width 5, height 5, and text white. And then we'll set up another div with a width of 20 and rounded. And this is where we're actually going to put our thumbnail. So we're going to have an image tag, and we can actually take the, let's see here. Where do we do that? On the create project page, I believe, or was it on the actual projects page itself? We had this here. So we'll put this here. And we just really need this get image URL piece here. And we need to import get image URL from our utils. Okay. So that should be good there. And then we need to have a file input. So input type is going to be file. Class is going to be file input bordered with full, max width large, and we'll add a bit of margin to the top. And then the name for this is going to be thumbnail. The ID is also going to be thumbnail. And then we'll have our button. Okay, so let's see what all this looks like as it stands right now. So if we go to our PocketBase here, we're going to copy this ID, and then I'm going to go to /projects /that ID and then /edit. See if we get an internal error. Let's see what happened here. So properties of undefined reading name. So it appears to be, oh, I messed up my return statement here. So let's actually return project like this, now we can see here that we have this. And I also messed something else up here with the text area. So let me just fix that really quick. So let's go into the edit page here, and I actually need to move this label up here. And there we go. Okay, cool. Now my trash icon appears to be not in the right location for some reason. So let me just save those styles again. I'm not really too sure why I have to keep doing that. It may have been the way that I installed something initially, but on my other projects, I don't have to keep saving these to actually repopulate the styles, but you may have to do that. So, okay, cool. Now we have our little button here that allows us to delete this. And what we actually want to add to this button is something. So what we're going to add is a form action here. And this is going to be !/delete thumbnail. And let me show you really quick where I got that from. So I go to kit.svelte.dev and I search for form action. If we look here, we can see that as well as the action attribute, we can use the form action attribute on a button to post the same form data to a different action than the parent form. So what this will allow us to do is essentially allow us to post, when we click on that button, it's going to post to a different action that's just going to take care of deleting the thumbnail, right? So let's say that the user has a thumbnail in the project and they just want to delete it and they don't want to add another one, right? Well, if we go through our normal form submission process, we're going to check that thumbnail. If it's blank, then we obviously don't add it to PocketBase. So therefore, there would be an issue with being able to actually delete one. But this will allow us to hit that action, which is going to then set that thumbnail to null or to nothing and allow them to actually delete that. And we can see that we have all this information populated here that we can edit. So now let's go ahead and set up our actions for this page. So let's come down here in our page.server.js and let me close that terminal out of the way. We'll set up actions. We'll say update project. Take in request, locals, and params. We'll get the form data as usual. We'll get the thumbnail. And then we'll check the thumbnail to see if it's 0. So if thumbnail.size 0, then we want to form data.delete thumbnail. And then we can do a try catch block here. So we'll say try await locals.pb.collection. We'll say the project's collection, and then we'll do an update here. And we'll pass in params.projectID because the update method in PocketBase, if we look at the API preview and we go to update, it needs the record ID. So in our case, that's going to be the params.projectID because we're accessing this page through this project ID/edit. And then we'll pass form data here. And then we'll catch any errors that we get. And we'll throw them back to the client, error.status and error.message. And then if all goes well, what we're going to do is we're actually going to throw a redirect somewhere. That probably messed up that import here. So let's just import this to the right location. And I'm just going to throw a redirect for the time being back to that project's page. So we'll say /projects/params.projectID. So this is good here. Now let's set up the actual, and we can actually test this really quick. So I'll just name this Dracula UI v2, and then I'll make sure I click Save Changes. And now we can see that we have Dracula UI v2. And if I go back to Edit, it's also populated here. So now let's set up that delete thumbnail action that we defined for that button, that trash can icon that we have. So we can say delete thumbnail. It's also going to take in locals and params. It doesn't need the form data because we're just going to delete whatever thumbnail is there. So if there's a thumbnail, we're going to delete it. Basically, if they click that button, that means they have a thumbnail and they want to delete it. So we're going to take care of that for them. So we'll say await locals.pb.collection projects.update params.projectID. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass an object and we'll say thumbnail is null. And if we again look through the PocketBase documentation, we go to files, upload, and handling, and we go to deleting files, we can see that we can just set the file field to a 0 value, null, empty string, empty array, whatever. Okay. And then we'll catch any errors. And then if everything works, we'll just say return success is true. Okay, so let's test this out now. So let's go into our edit field here and let's just click on this delete button here. Now we can see that it was deleted. If we go into PocketBase and we look at our projects, we'll see that we no longer have a thumbnail. And then if I want to re-add one here, I can click Save Changes. And now the project changes have been saved. We have the thumbnail back where we want it to be. Okay, so now let's set up something that'll make it a bit easier to access our projects and then delete the ones that we own. So if you noticed here, we've had this My Projects link here for quite some time. It obviously doesn't go to anything. So let's go ahead and set that page up. That way we can easily access, delete, and edit all the projects that we own. So let's go into VS Code. And then inside, we can close out of these for now. Inside of we can create a new directory called projects. And that'll have a +page.svelte and a +page.server.js. For the plus page.server.js, we're going to actually get all the users' projects. We can go ahead and take care of that first. So we'll set up a load function. It'll just take in locals. Again, if the locals.pb.authstore.isValid is not true, then we want to throw an error. It's going to be a 401 unauthorized. And actually, we could probably just say, actually, probably just throw a redirect here instead and redirect them to the login page. And then we'll say const get users projects. To be asynchronous, it's going to take in the user ID. We'll try to get the projects here. So we'll say we actually need to serialize this. So it's a import serialize non-POJOs from lib/utils. We'll await locals.pb.collection. I want the projects collection. I want to say get full list. We'll say undefined here because we don't want to specify a number of entries to get. We just want to get all of them. And then we want to add a filter here. So we want to pass in some query parameters and we'll say filter. We want to filter where the user is equal to, we need to wrap this in double quotes here, user ID. Okay. So it's going to give us all projects where the user is equal to the currently logged in user ID, which we're going to pass in our return statement. So let's catch any errors that we get. And then outside of this function, we'll return projects as get user projects. We'll pass in locals.user.id. Okay, so now inside of this page, my/projects, we should have access to all of our projects, right? So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and set the initial structure of this page up. And then we're going to build a component that will essentially have like a project list item in it, right? Because we're going to have a bunch of projects down a list and we want to make sure they all follow the same structure. We can just build one component and then render that for every single project. So let's go ahead and take in data here. We'll set up a title and some structure. And we'll say if data.projects.length is equal to 0. So if they don't have any projects, we're going to show like an empty state, right? So we're going to say, hey, like you don't have any projects, you can add one now. So let's go ahead and set that up now. So we can set up a p tag with text of center. We'll add an emoji, a sad face here. And we'll say, looks like you don't have any projects. Then we'll have a link with the class of button primary, max width, medium, MT4. We'll say add one as the actual text for that button. That will go to projects/new. And then else, what we want to do is we actually want to render out a list of projects. So let's go ahead and define that component. So we can go into our lib components, and then we'll create one called myProjectItem.svelte. And then we're going to take in a few things. So we're going to take in a project, right? So we'll say export let project. We're going to pass the project. So we're going to say for each project here. So we'll say each project or data.projects as project, right? And we're going to be able to pass in the my project item. Will be like this, and we'll pass in project, right? So let's go ahead and set this up. So the next thing that we're going to need is to set up again, of course, the initial structure here. So we'll have a div with a width of full. And then for the image, the avatar is going to show an image here. We're going to use the same thing that we used for the, where was that? I think it was in the project's ID page. So we'll use this here. Then we need to obviously take data away from data.project. We'll just make this project.name, project.id. Then we need to import getImageURL. Okay, and then we'll have another div, and this is going to hold our title, our project name, as well as the tagline. So we'll say div.flex. And the href is going to go to /project/project.id. And it's going to say project.name as the actual value for the a tag. And then we'll have a p tag with a project.tagline. Then we'll set up another div. This is actually going to contain some action items. So I'll have a div. We'll have a link first, and that's going to go to /project/project.id, project.id/edit. So this is going to be our edit button, right? It's going to have a class of button outline, and we'll say edit project. And then what we want to do is we actually want to have a delete button as well, but we want to use a modal so we can confirm the delete action, right? Because we don't want someone to accidentally click on delete and then it just instantly deletes our project, right? We want to actually make sure they confirm that. So we'll import modal from our components that they built, I think, in the last video. It's going to have a label of project.id. It's going to have checked is going to be, we're going to have to set a value up here. So let's just say let modal open. And then we'll set that to reactive as false. So it's not open by default. We'll say checked is modal open. And then within this, we're going to set up our triggers and stuff. So we'll first have the trigger. So I have span slot is going to be trigger. And the class is going to be a button. So button error, margin left 2. And then we'll have this say delete. So it's going to look like a delete button. And then we'll have the heading slot. So we'll have a div. The slot is going to be heading. We'll have an h3 with a class of text to Excel. And we'll say delete project.name. And then a paragraph tag, and we're going to kind of give them a warning. So we'll say at class equals text base. We'll reset the font to normal because if you recall, in our heading slot of our modal, we're actually setting the font to big and bold. So we'll set the text to base and the font to normal here for this paragraph tag. And then we'll add a little bit of margin as well. So it separates from the header. And we'll say, are you sure you want to delete this project? Once deleted, the project cannot be restored. So kind of like the GitHub, whenever you go to delete a repository on GitHub, it like makes you go through all those steps. We're not going to do all of that, but we at least want to give them a notice that, hey, like once you delete this project, you're not going to get it back. So make sure it's what you're actually wanting to do. And then we'll have another div. And this slot is going to go in the action slot that we set up. And then this is going to have a label. It's going to be for project ID. Okay, so this button is going to allow us to close the modal. So whenever we're using a label, we set the for here to the same thing as, you know, the label up here. Whenever we click on this button, it's actually going to be able to close the modal, right? So it's essentially checking that checkbox again, which then closes the modal, okay? So we'll say, make this a button as well, button outline, and then we'll say cancel. So basically the window is going to have a cancel button. And then we're also going to have a form with an action equal to delete project. The method will be post. And then we'll have an input with a type of hidden. Name is going to be equal to ID. And the value is going to be equal to project.id. And then we'll have a button. It's going to be of type submit. Class is going to be button. And we want to make sure we do button error here. So it's red and you know, it's warning label essentially. And delete. And then I think that should be good to go here. So when we click on this delete button, we're going to submit to the /delete project action. We're going to pass it the ID of the project. And that's what we're going to want to delete. Right? So that's why we're doing that there. Okay, so now we have this, we can come here and let's go into our components and let's actually say import my project item from my project item.svelte. We'll export that as well. And then we can import that here. So we'll say import my project item from lib/components. And then I don't think we don't need to end that if there, we need to end an each. So I think this will be okay. Then we can also add a divider here. And that's just will separate the projects from each other. So let's go ahead and look at what this looks like now. So I'm getting an internal error, and that's probably because I have an import messed up or something. So cannot read property of length. So let's make sure that we're actually returning projects here. So where's our projects? Oh, we need to actually return projects here. In our load function here, we forgot to return projects here. And that's why we're getting that. So now we can see that we have a nice My Projects page here. We're going to have all the projects be in a list. So if I add another project and call this Tailwind UI, for example, and I choose a thumbnail. Let's just choose one of the Tailwind UI ones here. I create and I go back to my projects. We can see that we now have 2 rendered here. When I click on edit project, I'm taken to the edit page. If I click on delete, this nice window pops up that says, are you sure you want to delete this project? Once deleted, it cannot be restored. If I click delete, nothing's going to happen at the moment because we have not yet created that action. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we go back into our page.server.js for the projects, my/projects page, we set up some actions. We'll have a delete project action. It's going to be asynchronous. It's going to take in request and locals. We'll destructure ID from object.fromEntries await request.formData. So object.fromEntries await request.formData will convert this form data into an object. And then we're just going to take the ID out because that's really all that we care about. And we'll say try, we'll say await locals.pb.collection projects.delete. And we want to delete the ID, right? So when we're deleting a record in PocketBase, if we look again at the API preview, we want to delete something. All we need to pass in is the ID of the record and it will delete it, right? If we have the correct permissions, of course. And then we'll catch the error and we'll throw the error as well. And then if all goes well, what we'll do is we'll return success is true. Okay, so now when we actually go here, let's refresh the page, make sure everything's good. And let's say we want to delete Tailwind UI. We can click delete, we click delete here. Now it's gone, right? We can also add use enhance to these forms as well. So where are all of our forms at? So if we go to my project item, we have, I believe, a form in here. We do. So we can import enhance from app/forms. I believe that's the right import there. So let's go into here and we'll say use enhance. I guess I might as well just go ahead and add it to all of them really quick. So let's go into our edit page and we'll go into the form we have here. And we can also use enhance here as well. And then I think, did we already add use enhance to the new? I don't believe we did either. So let's do that here too. Okay, so now we can go ahead and add this project. So we'll say Tailwind UI, we'll add this back. Create the project, and then it takes us to the home page. We actually want that to take us to the My Projects page. So let's update that as well. So for the create action here, instead of redirecting us to the home page, we'll redirect to My/projects, right? So once we create a project, it's going to take us to the My Projects page where we can then see the projects, edit it, do whatever, right? So if we go to My Projects now and we go to edit here, and let's just say I want to update this to a bunch of S's. Click save. You can see that now we get redirected to this page. I'd actually probably prefer it to redirect us to the My Projects page again for that as well. So for edit, let's also do that here. So for this, we'll say My/projects here. And then when I go to My Projects and I click on delete on one of these, if I click delete here, we can see that it was deleted. Okay, so I think it's gonna wrap this video up. I think it's getting pretty long at this point, but we were able to add projects to our application. So we're kind of getting the full stack or the full scope of CRUD operations in PocketBase. You should be feeling pretty familiar now with how to create new entries and things like that. In the following videos, we're gonna actually start to validate all of the data. I know I said I was gonna do that within this video. However, I think that it's important to kind of get through these basics first, and then we can kind of go ahead and deal with all the validation and all that stuff afterwards. So in the upcoming videos, we're going to be validating all the forms. We're going to be using Zod for that, and then returning proper messages back to the client. Also some feedback using Toast as well. So I'm looking forward to those upcoming episodes, and I will see you all then.